Welcome back to Top 5. Once upon a time in a palatial mansion stacked high with marble and gold, the Kensington seemed to embody the quintessential American dream. The family was a stunning portrait of affluence and success: Edward Kensington, a high-powered attorney with a commanding presence; his wife, Victoria, a renowned philanthropist with a gentle smile that captivated everyone; their eldest daughter, Ashley, a straight-A student and budding ballet dancer; and finally, little Mason, the youngest of the Kensington clan, a cherubic boy with tousled brown hair and an infectious laugh. The mansion, nestled in the affluent neighborhood of Willow Creek, was surrounded by meticulously maintained gardens and a shimmering lake that mirrored the sun's rays. It was a place of grandeur and happiness, frequently hosting lavish parties where laughter echoed, champagne flowed, and the sound of clinking glasses mingled with the gentle strumming of a grand piano. But beneath the shiny veneer of their life, darkness began to creep in. Edward was known as a tough attorney specializing in high-profile cases, often found burying himself in paperwork late into the night. While he reveled in his glory, his wife managed philanthropic events and helped guide the family's image, adorning charity galas with diamond drop earrings and her radiant charm. Ashley, the golden child, excelled in everything she attempted, though she often found herself overshadowed by the brilliance of her parents. But Mason was different. At 7 years old, Mason was quieter, more observant than his older sister, sitting in the shadows with an acute awareness that went beyond his tender age. There was something profoundly chilling about his bright blue eyes; they seemed to penetrate through smiles and laughter, collecting details that no child should note, the way Mrs. Williams down the road would refuse to smile back, or how the man who lived next door buried his secrets beneath the surface of a meticulously maintained lawn. No one noticed at first. Not when the family decided to take in their first pet, a soft golden retriever named Max. Mason adored him, lavishing attention and cuddles on the dog, until the day Max ran away and didn't return. The family organized a search, with Mason putting on the most convincing sad face, his eyes glistening with tears as he asked why he had to be the one to lose his friend. They never found Max, and after weeks of hopeful posters pinned around the neighborhood, the family grieved quietly. "I wish I had been a better dog owner," Victoria said, her voice heavy with guilt, while Edward comforted her with a firm hand on her shoulder. "What if he got hit by a car, or worse?" Ashley added, not understanding that Mason's gaze had shifted towards a dark corner of the garden where the flowers grew less lush, seemingly wilting in his presence. Months passed, and Mason's sadness intensified, slowly morphing into something darker and more menacing. The family, caught up in their own lives and the external image of perfection, kept on with their routines, but Mason's behavior began to shift. He shied away from sunlight and playdates, retreating into his own world enriched with an imaginative mind, one that began to take troubling forms. The first incident happened during an extravagant 4th of July party, the air thick with laughter and the smell of barbecue wafting through the vast estate. The family's friends gathered in droves, children running through the yard, their shrieks music to the Kensington household. Mason, however, sat alone in a hammock, watching. It was during the festivities that little Olivia, the neighbor's cheerful girl, wandered into Mason's territory. She was just 2 years older than him, and she wore braids tied with pink ribbons that danced in the wind. As she approached Mason, her laughter echoed innocently. "Mason, come and play," she said, her eyes sparkling in the sunlight. The boy blinked at her, his expression unreadable. "Do you want to see something cool?" he asked, a strange gleam forming in his eye. Before she could respond, he jumped up, taking her hand, leading her to the perimeter of the garden where the trees grew denser. Victoria, spotting them, felt an odd tug at her heart but dismissed it, assuming it was just the boy's imagination running wild. As they stepped further into the woods, the laughter faded away, muted by the whispering leaves. No one saw as Mason pulled the little girl deeper into the shadows. They vanished from view, just as fireworks ignited the night sky, illuminating the world for fleeting moments of brilliance. When Mason returned half an hour later, he was alone, his shirt stained with yellow pollen and a smudge of dirt on his cheek. No one noticed the absence of Olivia, lost amidst the unconcerned adults reveling in merriment. Hours later, panic brewed as her parents began to search for her, scouring the neighborhood while the Kensington family remained oblivious, too lost in their own celebrations. It wasn't until the sun began to set and the day dimmed that the screams echoed from the nearby woods. Mason, now apparently carefree, merely watched as Olivia's frantic cries erupted into the evening air, a sound that gnawed at the family's subconscious long after the fireworks had faded away. The following days arrived with a blanket of anxiety enveloping Willow Creek. Every parent clutched their children close while staying glued to the news. Where Olivia's face bloomed on the television screen, the missing girl remained a haunting specter in the Kensington home, floating through the house like a ghost. Yet the world continued to function. At the dinner table, while Edward and Victoria exchanged worried glances, Ashley brought up the tragedy with a wistful tone. She believed it could be related to the creature lurking in her dreams, a drastic measure of a child's imaginative mind. "Mason, do you think monsters can take people away?" Ashley asked casually, looking to her younger brother in innocence, who merely tilted his head, observing the food on his plate without responding. Days transitioned into weeks. Days turned into dread for the bare homes in the neighborhood, all missing children's laughter. Mason remained undeterred, continuing to watch and learn, his dark eyes piercing into the uncomfortable silence his family had created, feasting on the sorrow lingering in their hearts. A series of unsettling events followed. The dog that had reportedly gone missing weeks before didn't reflect a mere whimsy of the mind but instead lined up against a trail of other pets that disappeared as mysteriously as Olivia's own case. Rich families in the vicinity gripped each other at night, whispering stories of despair, but the Kensington family bore the weight of a growing darkness that pulled at their seams. By the time autumn rolled in, transforming the trees into hues of crimson and gold, another child vanished, 10-year-old Lucas Brady, last seen riding his bike through the neighborhood streets as twilight embraced the horizon. The police came knocking at the Kensington mansion, their seriousness undeterred by the lavish decor and radiant chandeliers. Homes were searched, and neighbors eyed each other with thinly veiled distrust, whispering rumors feeding their growing paranoia. Mason was the last person to see Olivia, one couple murmured, eyes darting toward the seemingly innocent child who played nearby, pulling at the strings of a doll, its porcelain face cracked and chilling. The tension in the air vibrated with a sense of impending doom as autumn morphed into winter. The family was falling apart at the seams, masked by a facade of normalcy. Edward, once too buried in work, grew increasingly hyper-aware of the behaviors around him. "Victoria, something is wrong," he said one night as they stood before a fire, shadows dancing on the walls. "The kids at school keep raising concerns about Mason. The parents. They think he's involved. The boy is innocent," she insisted, eyeing the hallway outside where Mason had slipped away, his small figure merging into the darkness. "He's just a boy." "I know my son," Edward grunted, frustrations boiling to the surface. "Children don't act that way for no reason. He's seen things, and I fear he's just waiting to unleash them." Mason overheard their hushed tone, lurking at the foot of the staircase, a look of calculating intent illuminating his expression like the glowing embers of the fireplace. But his laughter, the kind that echoed through the hallways, was softer, tinged with something malevolent and deep-rooted. Weeks slipped by, the case swirling toward a haze of endless darkness. The disappearance of children became grotesque revelations, despair looming larger than the Kensingtons could manage. Mason found solace in the confusion, collecting small bits of dark memories that thrived in the chaos. Finally, with one more disappearance, 12-year-old Zoe Martin, the tension reached a boiling point. The community finally turned its anger toward the Kensington household. They organized protests and wrote letters to the police, demanding an investigation. Mason, hearing snippets of alarm from his family, pieced together a dark fantasy where children didn't just vanish, they succumbed to the shadows of retribution and service to a power that beckoned him from his dreams. One evening, under an ominous winter sky, Victoria lay on her bed, unease circulating through the house like a ghost. The winds howled outside as she pulled the covers tightly around her. She couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her, stepping lightly through the snow-dusted halls. "Edward? Mason?" she murmured, her voice quivering. No reply followed, just an eerie silence that settled over the mansion, urging her to rise and explore the homespun shadows gathering in the corners of the room. As she descended the stairs, the chill of dread seized her. The lights flickered ominously, casting shadows that danced to their own rhythm. She made her way toward the grand living room, the fireplace casting an eerie glow that revealed Mason, standing by the window, peering into the void of night. "Mason," she called, a tremor in her voice. "What are you doing up this late?" Her innocent inquiry hung in the air like smoke in a ghostly room. He turned slowly, a sly smile creeping to his face and revealing a glimmer of something wild in his eyes. "Just watching. Waiting for the right moment," he replied. A shiver raced down her spine as the words echoed in the stillness, and in that instant, she recognized the ghastly reality. The boy who had once filled their lives with joy may be tracing the steps toward a destiny marred with darkness. But before she could respond, Mason darted from the room, his small feet echoing off the marble tiles. Victoria hurried after him, the air thick with fear. "Mason, stop," she called, desperation creeping into her voice. He led her into the basement, a space that hadn't seen the light of day in weeks. As Victoria turned the corner, her heart stopped. There they were, the missing faces, the children believed to be lost forever, frozen in a kaleidoscope of terror, their expressions a mix of confusion and sadness. In the center of the room stood a makeshift altar adorned with dolls, the walls painted in drawings of grotesque likeness that reverberated with Mason's twisted imagination. "No," she whispered, pulling away in horror, her eyes widening in disbelief. Mason simply smiled, his expression unreadable. "It's okay, Mommy. They're just waiting for me to introduce them to you. We can play together," he proclaimed, echoing the madness that had seeped into his life. It was then that reality shattered, leaving Victoria standing amidst the ruins of dreams long lost. With a scream, she turned and ran, the darkness chasing her through the depths of the basement while Mason called after her. In a final attempt to escape, she burst upward into the night once more, only to find Edward at the entrance, face pale and drawn. "We need to go," he urged, his voice low and filled with horror. But the gravity of what they had lost pulled at her heels like a chain, as Mason's laughter echoed behind them like a haunting melody on the wind. Plummeting into despair, the couple finally understood the chain of events that had followed their son. The darkness that had once wrapped them in a cocoon of wealth and prestige now clawed at their very souls. "Mason! Get away from them!" Victoria screamed, realization dawning upon her. But the boy only laughed, spinning joyfully, eyes alight with the thrill of despair, the power he felt over life and death palpable in his presence. The Kensingtons, once the embodiment of a perfect family, had been transformed into instruments of a horror unfolding in their own mansion, a cage of lost souls crafted by the innocent hands of their very own child. As they fled into the night, the mansion loomed behind them, a dark silhouette marked by the flicker of candles illuminating the twisted den of horrors left behind. And deep inside, in that sea of shadows, Mason continued to laugh, as the dolls swayed gently in the darkness, waiting, always waiting. The Kensingtons fled through the snow-blackened streets, their breaths coming in frantic gasps as the chilling winter air cut through them like shards of ice. Every footfall echoed in the silence, a reminder of the horrors lurking behind them, and the grotesque reality of what their child had become. They darted past the neighbors' homes, their windows aglow with warm light, oblivious to the nightmare unfolding a mere stone's throw away. Edward gripped Victoria's wrist tightly as they scampered toward the main road, eyes wide with the terror of what they had witnessed. How could this happen? Victoria gasped. How could our Mason? The signs were there, Edward hissed, panic and guilt clouding his thoughts. We were so absorbed in our lives, so focused on maintaining our perfect image, while he slipped away from us. I should have seen it sooner, taken him seriously. Victoria shook her head, tears streaking down her cheeks. But he's just a child. He was always so sweet and loving. We thought. Her voice broke as she remembered Mason's laughter echoing through their halls now engulfed in horror. Edward's mind raced, almost frantic. We need to call for help, get law enforcement involved. Maybe they can help him. Maybe they can fix this. But deep down, he understood the futility of it. Mason was more than just a boy playing in the shadows, he was a meticulously crafted darkness entangled in a web of tragedy and monstrosity. Through the night, the couple ran, their hearts pounding with fear, but it was not long before they heard the sirens, a distant wail growing louder. Hope sparked inside them, perhaps there was still a chance to save their child. They veered toward the sound, heading for a nearby intersection where flashing lights lit up the night like a ghostly beacon. As they reached the street, they saw a squad car parked at the curb, officers standing nearby, questioning neighbors who had gathered in small clusters, glaring at the Kensingtons with suspicion. The sight sent bolts of dread coursing through Edward's body. He could only imagine what stories had already whispered through the crowd about their missing son. "Please!" Victoria shouted as they approached the officers, her voice wretched with desperation. "You have to help us. Our son, Mason, he's in danger. He's not well. You must come back with us. It's urgent." The officers turned to look at Edward and Victoria, brows furrowing in confusion. One of them, a large man with a weathered face, stepped forward. "Mrs. Kensington, we've already been informed about the situation. We're looking into it." Edward clenched his fists, frustration boiling within him. "Looking into it? Our child is out there, and you're just waiting? He's down in our home, and he needs help. He's taken other kids." Murmurs raced through the small crowd, eyes wide with shock as the whispers spread like wildfire. Edward could feel their judgment closing in, a suffocating weight choking the air. "What do you mean, taken?" one neighbor asked incredulously, a woman who had always been friendly when they crossed paths. "Just tell them," Victoria cried, gripping Edward's arm. "Please. We need your help." The officers exchanged dubious glances. "If what you're saying is true, then we need to verify this immediately," Officer Roberts said. "But we can't just blindly follow you back to your house on a hunch, Mrs. Kensington. We need evidence." In that moment, doubt twisted through Edward's heart. How could he answer them when he could hardly grasp the horror himself? He remembered Mason's quiet, childlike demeanor, how he had effortlessly hidden things, twisting innocent words into the fabric of malevolence. What if he had created this tapestry of sinister events that spun further out of control while they had remained blissfully ignorant? The local officers began to methodically prepare themselves, but as they gained their composure, Mason's laughter echoed again in the cold wind. It was soft but menacing, the sound twisting like a knife through their hearts. Suddenly, the crowd fell silent, all eyes directed back towards the Kensington mansion, where the flickering flames erupted in an eerie glow. It wasn't just an ordinary reflection of light, it painted a portrait of impending doom, a warning against entering the forsaken abode that now housed the essence of their greatest fears. "Edward, they'll think Victoria stammered, her voice quivering. "They'll have to believe us," he replied, determination igniting within him as he squeezed her hand tightly. "We have to go back, now." He turned, charging toward the mansion, police officers on his heels as they shouted questions after him. But as they sprinted down the winding path leading to their home, the laughter morphed into an unsettling giggle, echoing off the walls of the grand estate. They halted at the threshold, Edward gasping as he pushed the heavy wooden door open, sparks illuminating the entrance with terrifying clarity. The mansion was dark, shadows consuming every corner, but the warmth of flickering lights beckoned from the living room. "Stay behind us," Officer Roberts instructed as they cautiously stepped inside. "Everyone keep your eyes peeled. If there's danger, we need to act fast." Moving through the silence of their home, dread crept over Edward. The opulence that once adorned their lives was now a prison soaked in despair. The family portraits that smiled down upon them turned into grotesque mockeries, their frozen expressions taunting them with memories of happier times, communicating everything lost. They reached the living room, where the fire crackled weakly, illuminating a sight that would be forever burned into their minds, a tableau of chilling horror. One by one, the missing children sat in a circle before the fireplace, eyes wide and glazed over as they whispered incoherently, strung together by a discordant harmony of dread. Mason stood in the center, his childlike demeanor painted with a twisted sense of joy. "Look, Mommy! Daddy!" he exclaimed, grinning with satisfaction. "They're here. I told them to wait. Aren't we gonna play?" Victoria gasped, falling back against Edward, who had gone white as a ghost. "No. Mason, no. This isn't right." Officer Roberts raised his firearm, eyes widening in disbelief at the horrible scene displayed before him. "Step back. All of you, step back. Get away from the children." But the laughter from Mason rang out again, pulling at the hold of reality, veiling the officers in confusion. "They want to be my friends," he screeched, dancing around the circle, his small hands reaching out toward the enthralled kids flanking him. The officers hesitated, assessing the inexplicable nightmare unfolding in real time, while a paralyzing tension filled the air. "Let them go, Mason!" Edward bellowed, fighting against the primal urge to plunge into the turmoil and take his son into his arms, back to safety, away from whatever losses had shaped him into this monster. But instead of retreating, the boy's gaze flickered over his parents, and for the briefest moment, they caught a glimpse of the child they once knew, buried beneath layers of darkness. "You don't understand," Mason shouted defiantly, eyes flashing with an otherworldly glimmer. "They chose to stay. I promised them." The children sat transfixed, glazed eyes flickering between confusion and a deep-seated fear as their innocent hearts echoed Mason's chaos. Victoria strained to tear her gaze away, desperate to protect dear memories and save them from the monster that claimed to be her son. "Mason, please stop," Victoria cried, stepping forward. "You need to let them go. We can get through this together." He blinked, and the childlike innocence that once characterized him seemed to momentarily flicker back to life. But in an instant, the moment was swallowed, and many layers of darkness whispered sweetly into his ear, reminding him of the power he had found in his twisted games. "Why?" Mason sneered, the facade never touching the edges of the fear radiating around him. And just as the words left his lips, the children responded in a disquieting unison, "We are not afraid. We want to play." Their voices echoed off the walls, harmonizing with Mason's maniacal laughter, sending chills through the hearts of parents and officers alike. "Mason!" Edward erupted, seizing the moment of clarity left in his son. "You are not like this. You are my son, come back to us. Let them go." The pleading reverberated through the room, clashing with the malevolent energy that engulfed them, and then the children stirred in confusion, questioning their allegiance with wide eyes. The laughter faltered, confusion rippling through Mason and the lost children. The officers moved closer, stepping forth with steady resolve as they commanded, "We need to take control of this situation, now." But before they could act, a surge erupted from Mason, a wave of anguish cascading through his small frame. "You don't understand," he cried, face contorting. "They can't leave. I can't be alone again." With those words, the room charged with energy as the flickering lights began to dance violently, shadows shooting across the walls as they threatened to swallow the very room whole. "Mason, please." Victoria wept, stepping toward him, fear eclipsing her heart. And just like that, in an instant of brilliance, Mason teetered on the edge of consciousness, eyes swimming between the love of his parents and the darkness that made him feel powerful. Screams of terror burst forth from the children, the voices crescendoing into a chaotic song, drowning out reason. The manifestation of horror swelled around them, becoming a maelstrom of darkness that seemed ready to consume everything in sight, and the childlike innocence fell into disarray. "Help us! Mason, help!" the children screamed, resonating through the chaos, urging him to understand the reality he had unknowingly ensnared them in. Victoria's heart splintered as she reached for her son one last time, her love spilling over into the chaos. "You can bring them back, Mason. They want to come home. Just come home with us. We can be a family again." In that swirling tempest of children's cries and Mason's turmoil, something broke within him, a fissure in the once severe darkness that clung to his spirit. "Mommy," he whimpered, the laughter faltering into something fragile as the shadows clung to his small frame. The innocence flickered again, a fire within, igniting the kind of hope that only came from love's embrace. "I don't want to hurt them. I just wanted." But before he could finish, the shadows clawed back at him, determined to hold their grip, and the misery erupted into a violent crescendo. "Mason!" Edward yelled, adrenaline coursing through his veins as he bolted forward, pushing through the choking darkness that threatened to drag them all down. The officers didn't relinquish their hold, they surged forward with resolve, surrounding the children, bringing bright flashlights that cut through the darkness. In that moment, the shadows retreated slightly, a flicker of realization breaking through as the officers shouted commands to bring the lost children home. Mason faltered, confusion tearing at the seams of his mind as he looked at his parents, eyes reflecting the chaos around them. "I can't hold them. They don't want to leave." Just as the thundering beat of fear surged within him, Victoria stepped forward, voice trembling but resolute. "You are more than this, Mason. You have the power to bring them back. You are not alone, you have us. We are your home." Tears streamed down Mason's cheeks as he fought against the shadows trying to pull him further into the abyss, an inner battle lying bare for all to see. He clutched his head in agony, the echoes of the other children crying somewhere far away spiraling into an anguish that seemed insurmountable. The light of hope battered against the tide, and in an instant, he cried out, the cry transcending mere sound, an emotional outpouring fueled by an insatiable desire for connection and love. "I don't want to hurt them. I just want a friend." In that moment, the very darkness that had cocooned him began to dissipate at the power of love, the bonds of innocence unleashed by the unwavering connection between a mother and her son. And with a surge of raw energy, the children stirred as Mason's voice reached deep into their hearts, a time long forgotten, where laughter thrived, and joy echoed between innocence and childhood. "Come back. Come back to me," he sobbed, and the hold of despair shattered like glass, a kaleidoscope of colors pouring forth as the darkness began to relinquish its hold. The children's eyes lit up momentarily, reflecting the healing light of their memories. One by one, they broke free from the trance, climbing to their feet with dazed but hopeful expressions. With sudden clarity, they rushed toward Mason, now just a boy lost in a churning storm of chaos. "Let's go home," they exclaimed, binding to his emotion. As they weaved through the fallen shadows, Edward and Victoria pushed closer, soldiers on a battlefield, stretching every ounce of love to steer their child back to them. Suddenly, the room rippled with light, a surge of hope that encased the children in a gentle embrace as they broke free, swirling around Mason who now stood drenched in radiant illumination. "Mason!" Victoria cried, tears pouring down her cheeks as the circle closed around him, mixed with laughter and tears, a victory won through unyielding love. The darkness shrieked in agony, pulled into the depths as Mason's laughter transformed, shaky but real, and echoed back, freeing itself from the chains of despair. With every ounce of strength, they collided like a comet tearing through the sky, an explosion of brilliance that shattered every piece of shadow, illuminating their spirits and ushering away the suffocating dread. In a breathless instant, the room stood still, echoes of laughter blanketing the chilling terror with warmth. As the officers truly began to move, witnessing the miracle of light overcoming shadow, Mason stood surrounded by all the children he had enticed into his web, the lost souls pulled into the embrace of love, reaffirming the power of family. For the Kensingtons, that night marked the beginning of an arduous journey, to heal what had been irreversibly altered, their bond stronger than any darkness that dared to intrude. And as dawn broke, bathing the mansion in a brilliant glow, they held each other, trembling but alive. The whispers of darkness scattered into the night, making way for new beginnings, a chance to rediscover a family, a chance to learn, to heal. From that day forward, the name Kensington stood not only for wealth but as a legacy of love assiduously stitched through dark shadows, reminding all that even the smallest flicker of hope could light the path to redemption. As for Mason, he learned that stories could be spun from joy and laughter, tales of adventure blossoming from innocent hearts. And every now and then, he'd pause to whisper to the universe, a wish for the friends he'd lost, knowing that, together, they'd forged a new hope that lit even the darkest corners of their world.